now, as promised, the news in detail. Let's begin with our top story. Pakistan has rejected the Indian Army chief's claims of destroying 3 terror camps in Azad Kashmir, calling the statement disappointing. In a tweet, military spokesman Major General Asif Ghafoor said there are no such camps inside the territory. He said the Indian Army made such claims to fulfill their vested domestic interests. Ghafoor said the Indian embassy in Pakistan is welcome to bring foreign diplomats and media for a visit to areas across the LOC. He challenged New Delhi to prove the existence of any such entity on the ground. Well, Indians are voting to elect state legislatures of Maharashtra and Haryana. The ruling BJP has formed a coalition with the Hindutva extremist Shiv Sena party to retain power in both states. Ballots are being cast for 288 seats in the Maharashtra State Assembly and 90 in Haryana. By-polls are also being held today for the Lok Sabha constituencies and 51 seats in 18 state assemblies. The elections come a day after India launched unprovoked attacks across the line of control, falsely claiming it targeted 3 camps. Congress leader Akhilesh Singh yesterday said the BJP government makes claims of strikes against Pakistan whenever there are elections in major states. Well, in another development, India is forcing detained Kashmiri politicians to sign a bond surrendering their right to speak against the illegal annexation of the occupied valley. New Delhi has amended its criminal law to chalk out the affidavit demanding complete silence over recent events. Signing the bond has been declared an essential price for release from Indian prisons. The second clause asks them to submit 10,000 Indian rupees as surety and 40,000 rupees additional in case of violation. Reacting to the report, Indian authorities defended the change as being absolutely legal. 2 more British lawmakers have raised their voices against India's clampdown in occupied Kashmir. Speaking at a Kashmir conference in London, MPs Matt Broda and Phillips Lee supported the right to self-determination of Kashmiris. Speaking at the event, Broda said he was shocked to learn that 9 million people were living in radio silence since August 5th. Lee said the UN must implement its Security Council resolutions to settle the Kashmir issue once and for all. Meanwhile, hundreds of Kashmiris and locals held an anti-India protest in the Canadian city of Montreal. Protesters there said they are speaking for Kashmiris suffering at the hands of Indian forces for the past 7 decades. New Delhi's lockdown and communications blackout in occupied Kashmir has now entered its 78th day. In other news, U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi and a congressional delegation have made an unannounced visit to Afghanistan. The delegation met top Afghan leadership, including President Ashraf Ghani, and discussed security, economic development, and governance. In a statement, Pelosi said her delegation was briefed by American diplomats on reconciliation efforts with the Taliban. She said the delegation stressed that Afghan women must be at the table for reconciliation talks. U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper also arrived in Kabul in a bid to restart peace talks with the Taliban. In an interview, Esper said the number of U.S. troops in Afghanistan could be reduced to 8,600. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also said Washington remains committed to peace and stability in Afghanistan. Well, Iran has rejected the establishment of Turkey's military posts in Syria, calling for a diplomatic solution instead. Foreign Ministry spokesman Abbas Mousavi said the integrity of Tehran's key ally must be respected. Tehran has repeatedly warned against the violation of Damascus's borders and occupation of its territory. Earlier, Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan said he will set up monitoring military posts inside Syria to ensure the withdrawal of Kurdish forces. In a speech, Erdogan said if they won't vacate the area, Turkish forces will start where they left off. U.S. troops withdrawing from northeastern Syria have crossed now into Iraq. Witnesses say armored vehicles carrying troops entered Iraq through the Sahela border crossing in northern Dohuk province. They also claim to have seen 30 American trailers and Hummer vehicles carrying heavy equipment. They said the U.S. troops crossed into the semi-autonomous Kurdistan region of Iraq. This comes despite President Donald Trump's claim that U.S. forces would not be deployed to any risk zones in the Middle East. But U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper said troops withdrawing from Syria will not be sent home. Speaking to reporters, Esper said that the U.S. is not going to leave the Middle East in turbulence. Well, in Lebanon, Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri has agreed to a package of reforms with government partners to ease the economic crisis there. But despite al-Hariri's reform pledges, a nationwide general strike has been called today to demand an overhaul of the government. This report now has more.
Danny Mortada has been protesting on the streets of Beirut since 17th October. He is unemployed but strongly believes it's his calling to put forward the people's demands and fight injustice.
When I see the Sunnis, the Shiites, the Christians, and the Druze from all regions, they don't care where from, how, and why. All united with one hand. This is alone energy.
The ongoing unrest in Lebanon was triggered by a proposed tax on WhatsApp calls. The measure was quickly scrapped. But anger over what was perceived as another attempt to squeeze the citizens dry has not abated.
We are here since the protest started, and we're not leaving until our demands are met. As they say, we are the children of the streets in 2015, 2011, and 2009. We were going to the streets during all those years, and we are continuing. We are staying in the streets.
Lebanese Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri has proposed a tax-free solution to the country's economic woes, but this will not be an easy task, considering the country's public debt stands at $86 billion, which is over 150% of the national GDP, according to Lebanon's finance ministry.
Elsewhere, North Korea says the U.S. and South Korea must come up with new solutions for the current standoff in the Korean peninsula. The Vice Minister of the People's Armed Forces, Kim Hyong-ryong, warned that hostile policies towards Pyongyang will lead to serious consequences. He said the situation has relapsed into a dangerous, vicious cycle of worsening tensions because of the actions of U.S. and South Korea. Pyongyang expressed discontent at the lack of progress in its negotiations with Washington. Earlier this month, North Korea threatened to end denuclearization talks, accusing the U.S. and South Korea of provocative actions. Well, Canadians are voting today in a general election seen largely as a referendum on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's leadership. Surveys predict a tight race as Trudeau's popularity plunged after the blackface scandal. Top contenders in the polls are the ruling Liberals and the Progressive Conservatives led by Andrew Scheer. Healthcare was the top issue during this year's election campaign, with the climate crisis not far behind. Voters will cast their ballots in 338 precincts across the country. 170 seats are needed to be able to form a majority government. Pre-poll surveys show that neither Trudeau nor Scheer is anywhere near that threshold. Well, Evo Morales is leading Bolivia's presidential election race, securing 45% of the votes, with most ballots there counted. He's likely, though, to face a second-round runoff against rival Carlos Mesa after failing to secure an absolute majority. That will be the first time that Morales faces a runoff vote in his 3 consecutive successful presidential polls. His rival Mesa celebrated his triumph in getting to the second round with 38% of the votes. South Korean-born evangelical pastor Chi Hyun-chung surprisingly came third with 9% of the votes. Chi's support for either candidate will be crucial for the second round on December the 15th. Spain's government says Catalan protests have caused huge economic loss during the past 7 days of unrest. The demonstrations began against the sentences of Catalan separatist leaders by the Supreme Court. According to Spanish government statistics, the violence has so far injured more than 600 people, including 288 police officers. The government has blamed the protests, resulted in an estimated loss of 2.5 million euros in Barcelona alone. Earlier, hundreds of anti-separation demonstrators took to the streets on Sunday night in Barcelona after a week of separatist unrest. Protesters called for an end to the violence. They said Spain's central government is not doing enough to end the chaos. Coming up next in this news bulletin. Dramatic mission saves Australian border collie. And the show ends of 2019 China International General Aviation Expo. Let's begin this segment of the bulletin in Chile, where the death toll from anti-government demonstrations there has risen to 8 as violent protests continue. The demonstrations erupted over price hikes and social inequality on Friday. The government has declared a 15-day emergency amid escalating tensions in 7 major cities. After an emergency meeting, President Sebastián Piñera deployed troops to the city for the first time. 5 people were burnt to death in a clothing factory fire near the capital Santiago after the premises were ransacked by protesters. Defying the emergency curfew, hundreds of protesters have stormed metro stations in Santiago. Police and the recently deployed military are using tear gas to disperse demonstrators. Well, in Bangladesh, 4 people have been killed and 50 others have been wounded in clashes with police during protests against an alleged blasphemous social media post by a Hindu man. Police fired live ammunition on demonstrators after 20,000 people came out in Bhola Island against government inaction. Police say they responded in self-defense after protesters pelted rocks, injuring security officials. Medics said the death toll can rise, with at least 7 of the 43 wounded sustaining life-threatening injuries. The Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, for her part, has dismissed the protests as false propaganda against a minority community. Confirming the statement of the Prime Minister, police said all the hackers have been arrested. Well, the Pakistani Navy has joined Italy-based 32-member trans-regional maritime network, expanding its maritime-related information access. TRMN Group was established in 2008 to facilitate the exchange of maritime information at trans-regional level. Chief of Naval Staff Admiral Zafar Mahmoud Abbasi signed the note of accession in the presence of Italian envoy Stefano Pontecorvo. He said the Joint Maritime Information Coordination Center of the Pakistani Navy is rapidly evolving as a regional hub of maritime-related information. The front page of every newspaper in Australia is blacked out today. The protest is aimed at national security laws, which journalists say have stifled reporting and created a culture of secrecy. The campaign by the Right to Know coalition was sparked by federal police raids on the national broadcaster ABC. A News Corporation journalist's home was also ransacked earlier this year. Media organizations said the raids had been conducted over articles which had been relied on leaks from whistleblowers. Prime Minister Scott Morrison says press freedom is important to Australia's democracy, but rule of law needs to be upheld.
The government believes absolutely in press freedoms in this country, and we have taken steps. We have taken the steps to add additional defences into our laws to ensure that journalists, Mr Speaker, can get about their task. In fact, Mr Speaker, in protections that exceed that apply to many others around the country.
Well, unlike most liberal democracies, Australia does not, in fact, have a Bill of Rights or constitutionally enshrined protections for freedom of speech. Now, a 3-hour rescue mission has saved Jimmy, the border collie in Australia. The pooch was stranded at the base of the cliffs at Bells Beach in the state of Victoria. State emergency personnel and the County Fire Authority attempted the dangerous 15-meter climb down the cliff. They strapped Jimmy into a harness and made the slow climb back. Jimmy had his owner's telephone number on his collar tag. Both the owner and the pooch were relieved to be reunited with smiles and a wagging tail. Well, most European stock markets are trading flat as investors wait to see whether the UK will leave the EU at the end of this month. The FTSE 100 in London and Paris's CAC 40 index are treading water. France's DAX index is bucking the trend, gaining 0.2%. The mood was similar in Asia, with Tokyo's Nikkei 225 and the Kospi in Seoul rising only fractionally. The Shanghai Composite and Hang Seng Index recovered from early losses on hopes that the U.S. and China would reach a trade deal by next month. The Hang Seng was also lifted by Beijing's decision to allow Chinese investors to invest in Hong Kong-listed dual-class shares. Two new typhoons are moving towards the shores of Japan, with the country still reeling from record-breaking storm Hagibis. Local media say the number of deaths in Typhoon Hagibis has risen to 80. Japan's meteorological agency says Typhoon Neoguri is expected to hit Tokyo's south and southwestern coast on October 22nd. Another typhoon, Boaloi, approaching from the south, will reach the east coast of Japan on the night of October 26th. The storms have estimated winds of up to 100 miles per hour, with the pressure of 1,000 hectopascals at its center. Let's now find out what weather conditions are like around the world. And with that, you're all caught up. Thank you for watching this bulletin here at Indus.